Welcome back to another episode of Grow Your Grass Off. We have an amazing guest today. Rob Avis from Verge Permaculture up in Canada is with us today. We've got some amazing topics, I think, personally, to really dive into. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Rob.
So if you haven't seen Verge Permaculture and the guests that they bring to their, I'd call it ecosystem, it's really, I think, amazing because it's such an amazing way to I think catalyze change, but they come at it from the education standpoint. So somebody who's wanting to really dive into permaculture, they can get a PDC, but they have a lot of other resources and events and workshops and webinars and things that they offer. So Rob, can you just touch on briefly kind of, what is it that you guys offer? Where are you at right now with your project, and just kind of give an update?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Things are always kind of in flux at Verge. I think any person that runs a business knows that you're constantly adapting to the state of the world and where people are at. And it's very different now than it was 14 years ago when we started. 14 years ago, we left the oil and gas industry to try, and I don't think we necessarily knew it at the time, but to try and find our tribe, which is why we started teaching permaculture. And it was crazy. I call them in the closet greenies, the people that wanted to do this stuff, but were afraid to admit it to their fellow friends. And amazing the number of oil and gas executives and blue collar workers and white collar workers that showed up. Were kind of embarrassed about what they did as a career, and we quickly eradicated that. Nobody should feel ashamed of the career that they're in. Humanity's taken, thousands of years to get to this point, and it's going to take, hopefully not thousands of years, to transition to a new paradigm. But the pandemic was interesting because it allowed us to kind of move from an in-person company to one that had more of a digital presence. And there's been some interesting kind of things that I think are starting to brew again in the world, as I don't know if people are purposefully forgetting what happened over the last 3 years, but definitely an amnesia is setting in, and or I've seen that anyways. And so I think people are kind of hoping that things go back to normal, but yet there's all these weird things that are propping up in the background, like, rumors of a financial meltdown or inflation or this new AI craze that's going on. And so I think the really easy way to kind of talk about what Verge does is we try and create meaning in a world that is going insane, or it seems to be going insane in a lot of ways, in a way that's kind of high tech, or at least is tech oriented, because we're providing content via digital medium, as we all are these days. High nature, and that's the piece that's typically lacking in the high tech world, is that we, when you look at things like the metaverse or AI everything, it's this idea that we can somehow disconnect ourselves entirely from nature, yet we are nature. We need it. Our microbiomes need it. Our brains need it. Our guts need it. Even our mentality, our mental well-being requires nature. And so we're trying to create meaning with tech, with high nature and high touch as much as we can, in a broad variety of domains, which is why permaculture is so hard to describe, because it's, food, energy, water, shelter, waste, community, finance, all of those things are kind of encompassed in permaculture. To the people that are ready to kind of take that plunge and start looking for solutions in a world that is full of problems, full of negativity, full of fear. Mollison said it best. In spite of the fact that the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And that's really what this is all about. And what's interesting is that when people start to take control of their own needs, their own supply chains, people don't often think about it that way, but growing your own food, capturing your own energy, all of these things, managing your own waste. Those are all small but meaningful supply chains that can make a really big difference in how comfortable you feel in the world right now. And a lot of people feel a lot of discomfort because they don't know where their food comes from. We really got to experience that in the pandemic, when all of a sudden North Americans who are used to seeing shelves stocked full came into stores, and it wasn't just toilet paper that was low in supply, it was everything. People had this visceral feeling that it's like, wow, I don't really know where any of this stuff comes from. I don't know what kind of risk lies behind that. And how do I do something about this? And that's one of the things that I really was drawn to, 14, 15 years ago when I started getting into permaculture, was this need to explore and understand the world through a bigger set of lenses, and then understand where I actually had influence and where I didn't. And what I found out was that when we worry about things that we don't have influence over, that's what creates the anxiety that requires SSRIs. And so being able to distinguish between the places where we have influence and the places where we don't have influence is really important. And then doing things about the places where we do have influence allows us to kind of move forward with our life in a very positive, meaningful, and hopeful way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think it's a great segue in terms of, because part of, I think, what we're all interested is, definitely the food growing aspect. Like you said, permaculture is a great, set of glasses to put on. You can look at all these different sort of industries and professions. But when we talk about growing food, you once told me that there was this idea, like, you want to make sure signal from noise, like the distinction between those two. I think that's fascinating, because in today's world, we have so much access, like you pointed out. The AI and the tech stuff is so heavy nowadays, and it's useful. But how do people who are wanting to get out there and learn something, how can we get better at learning, what's really good information? Because there is like disinformation, or there's conflicting things, especially when it comes to food growing. And what have you seen there? What have you been able to kind of tease from that, process for yourself?
Yeah, it's going to become even more important. If we think about the last 23 years, up until, we'll call it November of last year, when ChatGPT really kind of came onto the stage, we'll call it the Web 2 industry, so Facebook, Google, all the big conglomerates, Microsoft, Amazon, they were all in the game of grabbing attention. Their whole business was about attention grabbing. And because they realized that if they could grab people's attention, they could market to you. And it wasn't just those companies that were trying to create attention. It was also all the YouTube influencers that started popping up. I mean, Michelle, my wife, we were just about to go to bed last night, and she hopped on her phone, and this is like, there's a good and a bad to what I'm going to say. So this YouTube video showed up, and it was this girl in Ontario whose entire channel is based around grooming dogs. I was like, wow, what an amazing world we live in, where somebody who, would likely only be able to work for a certain number of dollars per hour grooming dogs, because they love to do it, hopefully, now can make an entire ASMR YouTube channel around grooming dogs. And probably she makes more money on her YouTube channel now than she does actually doing the work itself. And so it's opened up all of these incredible opportunities. I mean, you guys are able to do what you do in all different parts of the world because of the internet and because of our ability to capture people's attention. That's what we're doing in this podcast today, is we're doing that in an ethical way. We're presenting information and trying to find fits. And we think about putting a glove on. A glove that fits really good is an amazing glove to work with. And so we can use these tools and this infrastructure that was created over the last 23 years to connect with new tribes and new people, and try and help people to find information that's going to make meaningful difference in their life. But it can also be used in a negative sense as well. And so the negative version of this has been this proliferation of narcissism and clickbait, where we're all trying to one up each other and create something that's more interesting, more attention grabbing. And it's ended up proliferating fear and violence. And it's really interesting because when you look at the statistics, violence is actually trending down. Like a lot of the bad stuff in the world around how humans interact with each other is actually trending down. But you wouldn't necessarily believe that if you're just looking at the socials, because the things that make the most money are the most clickbaity, which are going to create the most fear and the most anxiety. And so attention has been the commodity of the last 20 years. As we move into the AI age, we're going to move away from an attention economy and into a seduction economy, because now we're able to understand human language models, and all of a sudden, you can now get an AI friend, you can get an AI girlfriend, and there's all sorts of interesting things that are going to start popping up. And we're literally living in a sci-fi, potentially a dystopian novel if we don't train these tools properly. And I don't think that we have an option, actually, at least in the short term. I think we're finding ourselves in a plow moment. And what I mean by that is when the plow was invented, humans were hunter-gatherers, and whichever humans adopted the plow were the ones that continued on. The ones that didn't ended up going extinct. And so AI is going to force that upon us. However, what's really interesting about AI is that it uses enormous amounts of energy. So the energy constraints of peak oil and things like that may end up creating a barrier for AI to proliferate, like some people are predicting. Only time will tell. The thing is that as we enter into this seduction space, it's going to get harder and harder to know what's real and what's not real. And especially as I have 2 young kids, and I wonder, there's a saying that Kevin Kelly, who wrote What Technology Wants, said that any technology developed before you're 35 is cool, and everything after that is something that's evil. And I'm over 35, and so I'm trying to figure out, like, what's our relationship going to be with this thing, because I don't think I can stop it. Are my kids going to find themselves completely addicted to the metaverse? Are they going to get chips implanted into their head? Like, all of these things are things that I'm contemplating right now. And I think for folks like us, I think there's a few things we can think about. Like, what's real is rare, and that's becoming more so. And what's rare is valuable. And I think that when we think about from a food growing perspective, there's this seduction of, you look at technologies like, what's that AI farming robot, FarmBot, where they've got this CNC device sitting over top of a raised bed, and it plants and waters and weeds. And then you've got other technology where you've got tractors that have lasers on it, and they're shooting weeds and stuff like that. And I think humanity will be easily seduced into adopting essentially Roombas for farming. And I suspect that we will all have to figure out how to interface with that in a positive way. However, I think that it's important that people realize that the Carrington event was a real thing, and it continues to be a really big threat going forward. And that was something that happened at the turn of the century when the sun basically burped, and all we really had for electrical infrastructure back then were telegraph lines. People died from electrocution that were running those telegraph systems, and the whole system basically went down overnight. And we have way more copper, we have way more transformers, we have electric cars and computers. Our entire world runs on computation now. And so for us to be seduced into giving away our food growing to AI systems is a black swan waiting to happen. And so while we will likely all be seduced into using some form of automation in what we do, and it really is just a continuation of the internet or the continuation of the Apple Watch or the smartphone, and to just say, well, this is too much, we're going to stop it now, is kind of being a bit hypocritical. We do have to remember that food is one of those things. It's the foundation. Agriculture and food is a foundation of civilization. And it behooves us to relinquish control of our food production to AI systems that may have, or likely do have, hidden fragilities baked into them, that we can't contemplate at this stage. And so as you're watching those socials, as you're consuming content, they're potentially really great places to start. They're horrible places to end. And one of the things that humans are so profoundly good at is empiricism, which is the act of doing and observing and then responding to what you've just observed. And one way that you can speed empiricism up is by working with people that have experience, that have years under their belt, that have made so many mistakes already, and that can help take that steep learning curve and shorten the time span down. Because the thing that's interesting, one of the things that I think about every year I plant my garden is that while people think that I'm an experienced gardener, or Michelle's an experienced gardener, we only have 14 gardens in us. We've been gardening for 14 years. That's nothing. And like by the end of my life, if I live a long, fruitful life, I might get another 40 if I'm lucky. And that's without a Neuralink chip. So you have a very short period of time, because especially in these northern climates, I get 100 days to grow, and then I'm stuck inside a cabin at -40 for the rest of the season. You want to learn as much as you possibly can learn in that really short duration, because you might only, if you're starting at 40, you might only have 40 gardens in you, and your first one is probably not going to be great because you're learning all sorts of skills you didn't have in the first time. And like we've just talked about, there's a lot of black swans lurking out there that could undermine our entire food system in a very short period of time, which is crazy considering we only have about 18 months of food in storage globally at any given time. And we passed peak grain production in 1986 per capita. So people don't realize how much of an edge we actually exist upon as a species, and how few people still actually know how to cultivate their own food. That was a big mouthful. I'm sorry for talking for so long.
Oh, that was great. And
that
that's
was great. Yeah, that was great.
I was going to say too that it's a good segue as well into the next idea I think that we could cover is kind of what does it take in your experience from what you've seen? Kind of like you said, there's a lot of people who need to get this skill because there's a need, because it's really something that's foundational to being human. In my mind, like you said, it's like we can't just stop at watching and living vicariously through people. We need to get out there and do it ourselves. We need to go grow something. What does it really take though, for people who are going to go out there and garden and grow their own food, from what you've seen, time commitment, all the things that you can factor in, what does it really take for us to go into that mode?
I guess it depends if you're a man or a woman.
Depends on the size of the garden too, right? Well,
and if you're a man, you tend to do things too big, and then your failure is too large, and you usually can't go back. So the women tend to be a little bit more intelligent in that regard. They tend to be a bit more conservative in what they bite off. So men should listen to their partners, if you've got a partner. But I mean, honestly, start with one raised bed. You just start really small. Start with something small and start with success. And your ability to manage a 2 or 3 foot by 5 or 6 foot raised bed, your chances of success are really high. And if you have a really good successful year, if you look at the exponential function, if you start with 10 square feet one year and 20 the next, 40 the next, and 80 the next, and 100, like things grow pretty quickly. And in fact, you don't even have to expand at a doubling pace. You can expand probably at a 4x pace until you get to the size that you need once you've got some basic skills. And then that rate of expansion can actually increase when you've got a coach in your corner that's keeping you on track. So yeah, I mean, as far as like growing all of your own food, once you've got, I'm going to say 5 or 6 seasons underneath you, if we're talking about vegetable gardens, and obviously it's going to depend on your climate. Like I live in one of the hardest climates to grow food, to be honest with you. Like we have baseball size hail, not every year, but we get it. We have 100 frost-free days. You can judge like the the ability of a climate to actually produce lots of food based on the number of nights you can drink a beer outside without a sweater on, and ours is about 2. So plants stop growing when the temperature drops below. Are you guys in Fahrenheit and Celsius on this show?
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, Fahrenheit probably.
So like 45, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, plants stop growing at night. Plants actually don't need sunlight to grow all the time. They'll grow, they photosynthesize with the sun, but they keep growing at night. But if the temperature gets too low, they stop growing. So it depends on the climate that you live in with regards to, I was just talking about this morning, Alaska grows the biggest vegetables in the world because they have 24-hour sun, 100 frost-free days. So if you think about 100 frost-free days at 24-hour sun, that's 200 days. And they've got really, really young soils there. So lots and lots of nutrient in it. Great place to garden. So where you grow is also going to have a really big influence. When you get into the warmer climates, like the Midwest or closer to the subtropics, like places like Texas, for example, California, Oregon, the more temperate places tend to have more pests. So you're constantly battling those. So every place is going to have their pros and their cons, and you kind of have to learn that. And that's why, coming back to signal and noise, surrounding yourself with people that have done it, that know the tricks to get really good gardens is really, really important. And so, like, I don't know, we've probably got 20,000 square foot garden right now. Half of it's not in production, half of it is. And you know, it took us 3 days to plant it. By the time we amended the soil, we planted it all out, and then we've spent probably a day in it every week or two, on and off. And but we're constantly improving things. So as your soil improves, the amount of work that goes into a garden goes down. As your fertility improves over time, the amount of production goes up. And then as you learn more tips and tricks, like one thing that we did this year, which had a really big influence on our success, was we put a silage tarp over our garden through the winter time. And you know, the weed pressure is almost nothing now compared to previous years. And over time, as we do that, we're going to remove tillage from the system, which will reduce weeds even more. Fertility is going to go up, worms are going to go up, microbes are going to go up. And so as you kind of go down this this pathway, things get easier, things happen quicker. But it's kind of like the Jevons paradox. I don't know if you guys know about that, but every time, the perfect example is a car, the internal combustion engine gets 1% more efficient, which it has done over the last 50 years. Actually, I don't know if it's been quite 50 years, but anyways, it has been progressively improving. Every time they get a new efficiency in the engine, they add heated mirrors or they add heated seats. And so the efficiency gets consumed in some other part of the car. And so the same thing happens when you become terminal at food growing, is that you just get over a certain learning curve and you're like, oh, let's add this. And so you'll add livestock to your system. And all of a sudden now you've got chickens that will prep your garden bed before you go and plant it. And so now instead of rototilling it or creating tilth in your soil, now you're using livestock to do that, and they're fertilizing it at the same time. Or you add cover crops. This year, every one of our paths had a 10 species cover crop in it, which is also growing the mulch for our garden. Plus it's growing enormous amounts of carbon in the soil. So every year you kind of layer on additional things. And so you're not necessarily spending less time. You're probably having more fun if you're doing fun experiments, but you're getting more production. The nutrient density of your food's going up. And overall it's just becoming, it's like when you drive in a car, you're going someplace and you wake up almost at your destination, like, oh, I don't remember actually driving there. That's the muscle memory in your brain, like doing the job of driving. And so gardening becomes like that over time, where it's just like, oh, I got to go out and do this today. That's like that time. It feels like the right time to go and, you know, thin carrots or whatever. And then there's all sorts of other, like, we live in such an amazing time right now. The tools that we have access to that are, ancestors didn't, like the Jang seeder, for example. What an incredible tool that thing is. Like $900 and you can plant a row of carrots in 30 seconds. And like there's hundreds of these tools out there that these innovative market gardeners are working on, and you don't have to be a market gardener to benefit from those tools. And so things that are really bothering them in terms of creating lots of labor and time, they're innovating on these tools in order to save them time. And why not bring it into the home garden and benefit from some of the innovation that they're creating? So that's not a direct answer, 1, 2, 3 hours a week, but it gets easier very, very rapidly. And so the first few years, maybe you're spending, I don't even know that you'd be spending more time in the first few years, as long as you start small. And then as you get better, you can get bigger and kind of do the same amount in the same amount of time. Or, sorry, larger amount in the same amount of time.
No, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think it's great to know your context, because it was kind of a question that was going to be open-ended anyways, just because it's so variable, right? It depends. That's like a quintessential answer, right? It depends on your situation, on what are the variables, like how much time do you have? Maybe they only have 2 hours a week. But I think it's fun to really consider, because as we talk about food production and what people can actually get done, it all works together to me. If you can get with people and have instruction, like for me, I love to learn through experiencing it. And so, like, to me, your prompt is really like, you got to just get started, and you're going to make mistakes. And that's kind of what we talk about a lot, is it's okay. Like, you got to just start, and once you start to read a book, or you watch a video, or you get help, it's you start to frame it in your own way, and it becomes part of what you do. And then, like you said, and this is kind of what I've seen too, is you start to read things differently. You see, the plants are looking a little bit tired, or maybe they need more water, and you don't have to, you can be more intuitive with it, in other words. So I think that's great. One other thing you brought up earlier was this idea of kind of, supply chain issues, or the fragility of our system. And so to me, it'd be great if you could touch on that a little bit more, in terms of, what advice would you have for people, that what we can actually do? If we empower ourselves, which I think we're all about, is we need to feel like we can do something, and we can take action on those things we can really actually do. We don't need to stress about the things that we don't have any control over. So in other words, what do you feel like are the best solutions that you've seen? Obviously, growing your own food is a great start, but what else would you add to that?
I think there's two pieces there. Probably one that no one's going to want to hear. And then the other part that's probably more in line with where your question is wanting me to go. But so there's so many reasons to take control of your supply chains. It's there honestly really isn't food for sale anymore. Like, when you look at the bricks level and the nutrient density of the average piece of food, organic or not, it's pretty abysmal. So just purely from a self-interested person concerned about their health, that's one reason to do it. And so food is one of the easiest ones to get a hold of, to be honest. Energy is a little bit harder. Water is somewhere in the middle between energy and food. And there's really good reasons for all of those things. I do think that the coming years, decades, we're going to see a massive reduction in energy output from our oil and gas fields. That's going to have an enormous impact on everything. The average calorie of food that we consume has anywhere from 10 to 20 calories of hydrocarbons in it. So if you start having a situation globally where your energy resource right now, just put that in perspective, a barrel of oil has 25,000 hours of man labor in it. We burn around 100 million barrels a day. So there's an equivalent to about 500 billion energy slaves on planet Earth right now, for 8 billion humans. So as you start to pull that energy out, like if you think about, like, every North American, for example, has about 150 energy slaves working for you full time. So if you were an Egyptian today, you'd have 150. This is a middle class family, have 150 slaves working for you just to kind of maintain the quality of life that we currently have. And so as your energy resource starts to diminish, that's going to impact everything. And there's still lots of energy, but society is going to have to start making decisions about where it invests that energy. And food obviously is right up there in terms of important things that you need on a daily basis. But I do think, like, if you live in a northern climate, you need to think about how you're heating your house. Electricity is a very nice amenity, so it's probably important to think about where your power comes from. And so you can do that at very small scales and make really meaningful impacts in your quality of life. And so starting to wrap your head around the fragility of our supply chains, I think, is important. Probably the most important reason to do it is that if more of us take a bit more of a role in supplying some of our needs, there's a multiplicative effect that occurs on a global scale. And so every calorie of food that I consume is 20 calories of energy that doesn't have to be invested into that calorie, for example. So while it seems like a little garden has a very small, insignificant influence on the state of the world, it actually has a massive influence, because every calorie that came from Mexico probably was grown by people that weren't treated very well. It was probably grown with water out of a dying Colorado River, or whatever river you want to call it. The other thing that's interesting about vegetables and this whole fallacy around veganism is that people don't realize that when you grow a carrot in California and you ship it to Canada, 100% of the nutrient from that soil is transported with it, and it's never going back there. And then we eat it and we defecate it into water and we send it out to the ocean, or biosolids get spread back on the land. And so if you're not growing any of your own food, the most environmental choice that you can make is to eat a carnivore diet, ironically, because the inefficiency of the cow represents the efficiency of the land. 90% of what that cow eats and drinks ends up back on the property. Only 10% gets extracted in the form of beef, which means that we're not mining that property of nutrients. The piece that people don't want to hear is that there's no going back in time. There's no off-grid mecca that we can create that's going to save us from ourselves. And the easiest way to explain this is to understand something as simple as the nuclear power plants that are dispersed all over the planet. Every single one of those nuclear power plants requires constant power in order to keep the fuel rods cool. And the shutdown period on one of those plants before it can actually be decommissioned is like 50 plus years. So if all the power disappeared tomorrow, and for some reason these nuclear power plants couldn't cool themselves, you'd have enormous nuclear plumes all over the planet as all these things started going off like Fukushima. So we have to take responsibility for our supply chains so that we're not burdening a system that's actually pretty inefficient at growing and supplying the needs that we need. But we also have to continue to be global citizens, and continue to try and figure out how to work through what Daniel Schmachtenberger is calling the meta crisis, which is the crisis of everything that's around us, like dead zones, plastics, nutrient dense food or the lack thereof, pesticides, herbicides, chemicals, peak water, peak oil, peak phosphorus, peak nitrogen. I mean, like, all of these problems are accumulating on top of our shoulders right now. And we as a civilization, as humans in this age, have to figure out how to transition and turn a corner, and create a new paradigm where humans are just as positive as they are negative, which means not running away from society in spite of how scary it all is. It means putting on your own oxygen mask, making sure that you're healthy, making sure that your family's healthy and that you're able to meet your basic needs. It means showing by example, and sharing signal as opposed to noise. It means making the world more fun and tasting better. It means inspiring people instead of scaring the crap out of them. And so it's both. It's like, how do we improve our own quality of life, reduce the burden, and in fact, possibly even if this idea that exists in our society right now is this concept of a human footprint, which is very negative. You think about it, like you think about, and that was a concept actually that BP Energy created, like your carbon footprint. It was a way of making consumers feel guilty about the carbon they were consuming. It was a very sneaky, backhanded kind of PR campaign. Or if you think about net neutral housing or xeriscaping, these are all baked in this paradigm that humans are inherently destructive. And you've probably never put words to it, but that's what's written in on our Facebook feeds, in our newspapers, on the television, in YouTube, is like, we're this dirty, destructive species that all we can do is walk around and create destruction. And at best, we can reduce our footprint. But if you actually get into some of the early textbooks from Eugene Odom, who was like the godfather of ecology, humans, and actually, and we kind of combine that with Newton and Einstein, and like every action has an equal and opposite reaction, energy is conserved, understand entropy. We can't help but have a footprint. There's no such thing as a zero footprint. Every time you walk on the soil, you leave a footprint behind. But why does that have to be a negative thing? Beavers cut down trees and they build dams. And as a result of it, they create 28 times the background biodiversity, that can exist there before they even showed up. So their deforesting actually created more diversity. Arctic foxes piss around their burrow, and they create habitat for species to thrive so that they can actually, they're gardening the species that they depend upon. Woodpeckers actually moved the pine beetle through all the pine trees in BC. They farmed the pine beetle because there was a monoculture and they took advantage of it. So if the most negative thing humans have ever done is the nuclear bomb, what's the most positive? How can we turn every single one of our footprints into something that actually makes Earth greener, that grows more food, that creates more topsoil, that harvests more water, that creates more happy little kids running around in backyards than there were before? And so we don't have to be this Darth on the planet. We can actually use the 100 million barrels of oil a day that we're extracting right now. Just imagine, like you look at the budget of the US military, it's billions or trillions of dollars, and who knows all the money that goes into it that isn't even talked about, like the dark money. What if we redirected all that money into regeneration? I think we could regenerate Earth in 10 years. Like, we'd take the entire US military, the entire corps of the US, like all the people in the US military, all the airplanes, we turn bombs into little tree pods. And all of a sudden, all that energy that's going into killing people and destroying stuff goes into actually reclaiming the Sahara, rebuilding the Amazon, name the problem, getting rid of the dead zones. Yep. So much of our human intellect is focused at destruction. We could easily refocus that. Well, wouldn't be easy. It'd be hard to refocus it, but we could refocus it and create a completely different paradigm than exists today. We have the knowledge, we have the money, we have the people, we have the machines. We just need to have the will. And that's where I think education and showing by example is really, really important.
Yeah, fantastic call to action there. I was getting a little goosebumps there. What other questions do you guys have? Ian, Lana?
No, I think that's incredible. But I was feeling the same way. I'm like, this feels like the end because you're ramping up energy. It was great. You're on a rant there. I loved it.
Yeah. I like that it's the kids, to be able to go out with my son each day and, pick carrots and anything. And he's bringing them to me, and just, that to me is one of the best parts about this, is for our next generation. And so we're doing our job. We just have to get everybody, on board. So,
well, Rob, how can people find you, Rob? And what have you going on in the near future? Anything you want to highlight before we end the show here?
You can find us at vergepermaculture.ca. We've got an academy that we're running, and so we offer master classes all the time on all these things, and obviously the permaculture design course that happens once to twice a year depending on the year. And yeah, we have a YouTube channel and we write a newsletter, so head on over there. We've been writing blogs for 14 years. I think I have over 800 videos on our YouTube channel, so there's no shortage of content and information. If you're strapped for cash or don't have the ability to take some of these courses, there's lots of free info out there. And if you are ready to take the plunge, PDC will change your life. It changed mine. I left the oil and gas industry over 15 years ago now, and never looked back. Permaculture was the thing that I was seeking in university but didn't exist. So get in touch with us, send us a line, and hopefully see you in a future program.
Fantastic. Yeah, I agree. I totally think that a PDC is worth the energy and effort. And no, I appreciate all your content. I've enjoyed looking at it myself. So thanks for doing what you're doing and getting out there.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Take care.
Thank you, Rob.